started with the way her laugh changed. That high-pitched giggle she'd reserved for private moments with me suddenly echoed at odd times, on her phone while texting late at night, and once when she thought I was out of earshot. Amber, my wife of 6 years, was different lately. The carefree, easygoing woman I'd married seemed sharper, more defensive. The intimacy between us was there but forced. I couldn't place my finger on it, but my gut told me something was wrong. One Friday evening, Amber came home smelling like overpriced perfume. Not hers. She claimed it was from hugging her friend Stacy at a nightclub. I let it slide, though her explanations didn't sit right. A nightclub? Amber was more of a Netflix in pajamas kind of person. And Stacy? She'd moved out of state 3 months ago. Something wasn't adding up, and I wasn't the kind of man to sit around waiting for answers to fall into my lap. I started paying closer attention, looking for cracks in her stories. That's when the pieces began to align. Her frequent girls' night out trips to the new downtown club, the sudden obsession with her appearance. Buying new dresses, getting her hair done weekly, and wearing makeup that screamed, "Look at me," instead of her usual subtle elegance. It wasn't her style. But perhaps the most damning clue came when I noticed her phone notifications. They were all silenced, and she kept it face down wherever she went. I decided to investigate, casually asking her questions, observing her reactions. "How was Stacy's party?" I'd ask. Her eyes would dart away. "Good. You know, the usual dancing and drinks." She'd reply, "Too quick, too rehearsed." One night, Amber came home smelling of whiskey, a drink she despised. It was after midnight, and her dress was wrinkled. I decided to press her. "Rough night?" I asked, feigning nonchalance. She waved it off, claiming she'd spilled someone else's drink on her while trying to leave. "Whiskey, though?" I pushed, locking eyes with her. "Yeah, Stacy's boyfriend drinks it, I think. I don't know, Nate. Why are you acting like I'm on trial?" She stormed upstairs before I could reply. That night I couldn't sleep. If I was wrong, I'd risk ruining our marriage with my paranoia. But if I was right, Amber had already burned it to the ground. The following morning, Amber was chipper, acting as though the tense exchange from the night before had never happened. She kissed me on the cheek and hummed while making her coffee. "I'm meeting Stacy for brunch," she said brightly. Stacy again. I forced a smile, nodding as though I believed her. "Tell her I said hi." Amber barely glanced up. "Sure." As she walked out the door, I noticed she had on a low-cut blouse and a pair of skinny jeans that hugged her figure. That wasn't her usual outfit for casual brunches. I decided I couldn't let this go anymore. My instincts screamed at me to dig deeper. I remembered a friend's advice about tracking apps. Something discreet I could install on her phone without her knowing. Amber always left her phone charging in the kitchen while getting ready, and I seized the moment. My hands trembled slightly as I connected her phone to my laptop and uploaded the software. Within minutes, the app was running in the background, invisible to her and syncing with mine. For the first few days, there was nothing unusual. Her locations were consistent with her stories. Work, the gym, a coffee shop here and there. I started to think I might have been overreacting. But on Thursday night, everything changed. Amber claimed she was heading to a book club meeting. I watched from the living room as she checked herself in the mirror, her fitted black dress clinging to her curves. A book club? Who dresses like that for discussing literature? My phone buzzed shortly after she left. The app showed she wasn't anywhere near her supposed book club location. Instead, she was at a nightclub downtown, the one I'd heard her mention before. My heart raced as I stared at the blinking dot on the screen, willing it to move, to show me I was wrong. But it didn't. I grabbed my car keys and followed the GPS location, parking a block away to avoid being spotted. The bass thumped from inside the club as I approached, a line of partygoers stretching around the building. I slipped inside unnoticed, scanning the dimly lit room. That's when I saw her. Amber was at the bar, laughing too loudly, leaning into a man who was definitely not Stacy's boyfriend, or any friend I recognized. He was tall, broad-shouldered, with a cocky grin that made my stomach turn. They were close, her hand brushing his arm as he whispered something in her ear. It hit me like a punch to the gut. My wife wasn't just lying. She was betraying me. I stayed in the shadows, seething as I watched them. Amber tossed her head back, laughing at something he said. Her hand lingered on his chest as he slid his arm around her waist. I couldn't take it anymore. I stormed out, my chest tight and my vision blurred. My mind raced with questions. How long had this been going on? Was I just some oblivious fool while she carried on behind my back? I drove home in silence, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. There was no denying it now. Amber was cheating on me. Amber walked through the door around 1 a.m., her heels clicking softly against the hardwood floor. I was seated in the living room, pretending to watch TV. My chest tightened at the sight of her. Still in that black dress, her hair slightly disheveled. She froze when she noticed me. "You're still up?" she asked, her tone too casual. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, keeping my eyes on the screen. "How was the book club?" "Oh, it was good," she said, kicking off her heels and tossing her bag onto the couch. "We discussed this thriller Stacy picked. Lots of twists and turns. You'd like it." Her lie was so smooth, so effortless. I bit my tongue, watching her head toward the kitchen. My mind raced, torn between confronting her immediately and playing it cool to gather more evidence. She returned with a glass of water, her expression softening as she looked at me. "You okay? You seem tense." I forced a smile. "Just tired. Long day." Amber nodded, sitting beside me on the couch. She placed a hand on my thigh, a gesture that once felt comforting but now made my skin crawl. "You know you can talk to me, right?" she said softly. The audacity. Here she was, fresh from flirting with another man, acting as though she cared. My jaw tightened, but I kept my composure. "Of course," I said, standing up abruptly. "I'm going to bed." She looked puzzled but didn't press. "Okay, I'll be up in a minute." I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling as she climbed in beside me. She turned off the light, and the room plunged into darkness. I could feel her shifting closer, her hand brushing my arm. "Good night, Nate," she murmured, her voice tinged with a sweetness that felt like poison. "Good night," I replied coldly, my back turned to her. The following day, I decided to dig deeper. I combed through the app's location history and found that the nightclub wasn't her only secret destination. There were several visits to a downtown hotel, all within the past 2 months. My heart sank further as I pieced together the timeline. I called in sick to work and spent the day gathering evidence. I printed screenshots of her location history, noted the dates and times of her outings, and even considered hiring a private investigator. But deep down, I knew I already had enough. The next step was confronting her. That evening, I made her favorite dinner, fettuccine alfredo with garlic bread and a bottle of white wine. Amber walked in, surprised to see me cooking. "What's the occasion?" she asked, smiling as she set down her bag. "Just wanted to do something nice for you," I replied, masking my intentions. We sat down to eat, the atmosphere deceptively warm. I asked her about her day, listened to her stories about work, and even laughed at a joke she made. But as the meal went on, the weight of what I knew pressed harder against my chest. Finally, as she sipped her wine, I leaned back in my chair and studied her. "Amber," I began, my tone steady but sharp, "do you ever feel like we're drifting apart?" Her eyes widened slightly, and she set down her glass. "What do you mean?" "I mean, do you feel like there's something missing between us?" I pressed, watching her closely. She hesitated, a flicker of guilt crossing her face. "No, not really." "Why? Do you?" I didn't answer immediately, letting the silence stretch. "I just want to make sure we're honest with each other," I said finally. "That's important to me." Amber's smile faltered, and she looked down at her plate. "Of course. I mean, we are." I nodded slowly, deciding to let her stew for now. The real confrontation would come soon enough. The tension between us hung thick in the air for the next few days. Amber seemed more cautious, watching me as though she sensed a shift in my demeanor. She kept up her facade, her sweet smile, her lingering touches, but I could see the cracks. Every time her phone buzzed, she'd turn it away from me, her excuses growing flimsier. By Friday evening, I couldn't hold it in any longer. I'd spent the day replaying her lies, the nightclub scene, and the hotel visits in my mind. The weight of it all was unbearable. I needed the truth from her lips, no matter how much it hurt. When she came home that night, I was waiting in the living room, a folder of printed evidence on the coffee table. Amber walked in, her expression softening when she saw me. "Hey, you're home early," she said, slipping off her heels. "Everything okay?" I didn't answer. Instead, I motioned for her to sit down. "We need to talk." Amber froze for a moment, then forced a smile. "Sure. What's up?" She sat across from me, her posture tense. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "Where were you last Thursday night?" Her eyes widened, and she let out a nervous laugh. "I told you I was at book club." "Why?" "Really?" I said, tilting my head. "Which book did you discuss?" She hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the hem of her blouse. It was a mystery novel. I can't remember the name." I leaned back, crossing my arms. "How about the nightclub downtown? Does that ring a bell?" Amber's face paled, her smile disappearing. "What are you talking about?" I reached for the folder, opening it and sliding the printouts across the table. "Your location history, the nightclub, the hotel. You've been lying to me, Amber." She stared at the papers, her lips parting as if to deny it, but no words came out. Her eyes darted back to mine, panic setting in. "Nate, I can explain." "Explain what?" I snapped, my voice rising. "That you've been sneaking around with another man? That you've been treating me like a fool while you play house with someone else?" Tears welled in her eyes, but I felt no sympathy. "It's not what you think," she stammered, her voice trembling. "It's just a friend." "A friend?" I scoffed, my anger boiling over. "You don't flirt with friends at nightclubs. You don't sneak off to hotels with friends. Who is he, Amber? Tell me." She buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking. "His name is Travis," she whispered finally. "It started a few months ago. I didn't mean for it to happen." "Didn't mean for it to happen?" I repeated, incredulous. "You chose this, Amber. You lied to me, you betrayed me, and now you're trying to act like it's some accident." She looked up at me, her tears streaking her mascara.
I'm sorry, Nate.
"I didn't want to hurt you." "Well, congratulations," I said coldly. "You've done just that." The silence that followed was deafening. Amber tried to reach for my hand, but I pulled away, standing up. "Pack your things," I said, my voice firm. "I want you out by morning." Her mouth opened in shock, but I didn't give her a chance to argue. I walked upstairs, slamming the door behind me. My mind was spinning, my chest aching, but one thing was clear. This marriage was over. I stayed in the bedroom, pacing, trying to calm the storm inside me. The sound of Amber's muffled crying reached me through the door, but I refused to let it affect me. My trust was shattered, and her tears wouldn't glue it back together. After an hour, I heard her tentative knock. "Nate," she called softly. "Please, can we talk?" I opened the door just enough to see her face, red, puffy, and tear-streaked. "What could you possibly say that I'd want to hear?" I asked sharply. She hesitated, clutching a tissue in her hand. "I know I messed up, but please, just let me explain everything. Travis. He doesn't mean anything to me." "Doesn't mean anything?" I said, stepping out into the hall. "You risked our marriage for someone who doesn't mean anything? Do you even hear yourself?" She flinched, then lowered her gaze. "It wasn't serious, I swear. It was just a distraction." "A distraction from what?" I demanded. "From the life we built together? From the husband who stood by you through everything?" Amber's lip quivered. "You don't understand, Nate." I felt invisible. "You're always so busy with work, with everything else." I needed to feel alive. Her words hit me like a slap. I wanted to shout, to tell her how absurd and selfish she sounded. But instead, I took a deep breath and met her gaze. So, your solution to feeling invisible was to betray me? To sneak around and lie? Do you have any idea what this feels like? She didn't answer, her silence speaking volumes. I walked back into the bedroom, grabbing a duffel bag from the closet. I'm done, Amber. I'm not going to be the guy who gets walked all over. Pack your things and leave. She followed me, her voice growing desperate. Wait, Nate. Please. We can fix this. I'll cut him off, I'll go to therapy. Whatever it takes. I turned to face her, my expression cold. Do you even want to fix this? Or are you just afraid of losing the life you're comfortable with? Amber opened her mouth to respond, but I cut her off. You don't love me, Amber. You love the security I give you, and you've mistaken my loyalty for weakness. Tears spilled down her cheeks again. That's not true. I do love you. I made a mistake, but I want to make it right. I laughed bitterly. You think love is enough to erase what you've done? Love doesn't excuse betrayal. Love doesn't cheat. The silence stretched between us, heavy and suffocating. Finally, I broke it. You have until morning to figure out where you're going. This is my house, and I won't share it with someone who disrespects me. Amber's shoulders slumped in defeat, and she turned to leave the room. As the door closed behind her, I sank onto the bed, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on me. I felt a pang of regret, but it wasn't for losing Amber. It was for the man I used to be, the man who believed in forever. The house was unnervingly quiet after Amber left the room. I lay on the bed, staring at the ceiling, the stillness broken only by the occasional sound of her pacing downstairs. Despite everything, my mind was a whirlpool of conflicting emotions. Anger, betrayal, sadness, but also clarity. At around midnight I got up. Sleep was impossible, and I couldn't just lie there stewing in my thoughts. I headed downstairs to find Amber sitting on the couch, wrapped in a blanket. She looked up when she saw me, her expression a mixture of hope and dread. I'll sleep in the guest room tonight, I said curtly, heading toward the kitchen for a drink. Nate, she started, but her voice faltered. I stopped and turned to look at her. What, Amber? My tone was sharp, but I didn't care anymore. What could you possibly say right now? She hesitated, then said quietly, it wasn't just about feeling invisible. I think I wanted to hurt you. Her words stopped me in my tracks. I stared at her, the anger in my chest replaced by something colder. You wanted to hurt me? I repeated, my voice low and dangerous. Why? Her eyes filled with tears again. Because you've been so distant. You're always at work, always distracted. I felt like I was losing you, and I didn't know how to handle it. That's your excuse? I shot back, incredulous. Because I work hard to provide for us, to give us a good life, you decided to throw a grenade into our marriage? Do you even hear how selfish that sounds? She broke down, sobbing into her hands. I didn't move to comfort her. Couldn't. Instead, I walked past her and grabbed a bottle of whiskey from the kitchen. I poured a generous glass, the amber liquid glinting in the dim light, and sat down at the dining table. As I drank, I thought about all the moments I'd ignored my instincts. The late nights, the evasive answers, the sudden interest in girls' nights. How long had I been blind to her deceit? Or worse, how long had I chosen to ignore the signs because it was easier than facing the truth? Amber's voice interrupted my thoughts.
Nate, I'm sorry.
I really am. I didn't think it would go this far. I looked at her, my anger tempered now by exhaustion. That's the problem, Amber. You didn't think at all. You didn't think about me, about us. You only thought about yourself. She flinched, and for a moment, I thought she might lash out or try to defend herself again. But instead, she just nodded, her face crumpling under the weight of her guilt. I'll leave in the morning, she whispered, her voice barely audible. Good, I replied, finishing my drink. It's the least you can do. I left her sitting there, her sobs echoing softly in the background as I climbed the stairs to the guest room. My chest ached, not with longing or regret, but with a profound sense of loss, for the life I thought we had. As I lay on the unfamiliar bed, one thought kept looping in my mind. This was the end, and there was no going back. I woke to the faint sound of a suitcase zipper. For a moment, disoriented and still groggy, I thought it was a bad dream, but the dull ache in my chest reminded me that this was real. Amber was leaving. I got up, my movements sluggish, and walked downstairs. She was by the front door, her suitcase parked beside her, and her face was pale. Her eyes, red and puffy, avoided mine as she adjusted her coat. "Morning," I said, my voice devoid of emotion. She flinched at the coldness in my tone. "Morning," she whispered. I leaned against the doorway to the living room, watching her struggle to find words. "Where are you going?" "I'll stay with my sister," she said softly, her voice trembling. "Just for a while, until I figure things out." "Good," I said bluntly, crossing my arms. "You should have plenty of time to think about the mess you made." Amber's lips parted as if to say something, but she stopped herself. She looked down at her suitcase, then back at me. "Nate, I know I don't deserve forgiveness, but I need you to know that I still love you. I always have." I let out a bitter laugh. "Love? Amber, if this is your idea of love, I want no part of it." Her eyes glistened with fresh tears, but I refused to soften. "You've said enough, Amber. Just go." She nodded, biting her lip as she picked up her suitcase. As she opened the door, she hesitated, looking back at me one last time. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I didn't respond, my face a mask of stone. She stepped outside, closing the door behind her. The sound of her car engine starting and fading into the distance left the house eerily quiet. I stood there for a moment, staring at the door, half expecting her to come back. But she didn't, and I felt relief. The next few hours were a blur. I paced the house, my thoughts tangled. I replayed every argument, every suspicious moment, wondering how I'd missed the signs. My phone buzzed, breaking the silence. It was my best friend, Jake. "Hey man," he said, "just checking in. You sounded off last night." I hesitated, then sighed. "Amber's gone. She's been cheating." There was a pause on the other end. "What?" Jake's voice was laced with shock. "Are you serious?" "Yeah," I said, my voice hollow. "I caught her. She admitted it." "Damn, Nate. I don't even know what to say. That's brutal." I let out a bitter laugh. "Tell me about it. You need anything? Someone to come over? Beer? A sledgehammer?" he asked, trying to lighten the mood. I chuckled despite myself. "Nah, I'll be fine. Thanks, though." "All right," he said, his tone softening. "But seriously, don't hesitate to call. Anytime." "Thanks, Jake. I mean it." As I hung up, a strange calm settled over me. I knew the days ahead wouldn't be easy, but I also knew one thing for certain. I wouldn't let Amber or this betrayal define my life. After Amber left, the silence in the house felt oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every hum of the refrigerator, reminded me of her absence. Yet that absence also brought clarity. For the first time in weeks, my mind was unclouded. This wasn't just about heartbreak, it was about taking back control. I spent the morning gathering documents. Bank statements, property deeds, anything that tied Amber and me together financially. I wasn't about to let her walk away with a single cent more than she deserved, which, in my opinion, was nothing. By afternoon, I was sitting in the office of a divorce attorney. Her name was Linda Grayson, and her no-nonsense demeanor was exactly what I needed. She adjusted her glasses and scanned the stack of paperwork I'd handed her. "Infidelity," she muttered, shaking her head. "Classic grounds for divorce. Do you have evidence?" I nodded, sliding a folder across her desk. Inside were screenshots from the tracking app, showing Amber's late-night escapades at the nightclub and the hotel. I'd even printed the messages she'd exchanged with Travis that I'd found when I finally unlocked her phone. Each text was a dagger, but they were also proof. Linda flipped through the pages, her expression unreadable. "This is solid," she said finally. "It'll paint a clear picture of her misconduct." Now let's talk assets. The house, bank accounts. How are they divided? The house is in my name, I said firmly. I bought it before we were married. As for our accounts, most of the savings came from my earnings. Linda nodded. Good. That'll work in your favor. And Amber? Does she have her own income? She's been working part-time at a boutique, I said with a shrug. But nothing substantial. Linda's lips curved into a thin smile. Then this will be straightforward. She has little leverage, and with her infidelity on record, we can ensure she walks away with minimal impact on you. Hearing that lifted a weight off my chest. For the first time since this nightmare began, I felt like I had the upper hand. When I returned home, the house felt a little less suffocating. I poured myself a drink and sat at the dining table, staring out the window. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the backyard. It struck me how much of my life I'd built here. Every corner of this house was filled with memories. Good ones until Amber tainted them. My phone buzzed, interrupting my thoughts. It was a message from Amber. Can we talk? Please. I stared at the screen, debating whether to reply. Part of me wanted to ignore her, but another part wanted to hear what excuse she'd cooked up this time. After a moment, I typed back, "What's there to talk about?" Her response came quickly. "I know I messed up, but we can fix this. Please, just hear me out." I didn't reply. Instead, I set the phone down and took a long sip of whiskey. There was nothing left to say to her. The lawyer would handle the rest. The next morning, I woke up feeling lighter than I had in weeks. Amber was gone, and with Linda handling the legal side, I felt like I was finally regaining control. I poured myself a cup of coffee and settled onto the couch, trying to enjoy the stillness of the house. My phone rang, breaking the silence. The caller ID showed an unfamiliar number. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello, is this Nate?" The voice on the other end was deep and cautious. "Yes, who's this?" "This is Travis," he said, and my blood instantly ran cold. I clenched the phone tighter, my jaw locking. "What do you want?" I wanted to apologize," he said, his tone almost pleading. "I didn't know she was married at first. She told me later, and by then, things had already gone too far."
I am sorry, man.
I laughed bitterly. "You're sorry? You think that fixes anything? You knew, and you still kept seeing her." "You're right," he admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "I screwed up, but she made it seem like you two were practically over, that you didn't care about her." My grip on the phone tightened. "Don't you dare try to justify what you did. You knew exactly what you were doing." Travis was silent for a moment. Then he sighed. "Look, I just thought you should know. Amber's not the only one who lied. She told me things about her feelings about your relationship that didn't make sense. I think she was trying to make herself feel less guilty." I felt a pang of anger and something else. Curiosity. "Like what?" "She told me you cheated first," Travis said cautiously. "That she found out a year ago and never confronted you. That's why she felt justified in what she did." My mind reeled. Cheated? A year ago? It was a blatant lie. "That never happened," I said through gritted teeth. "I figured as much," Travis said quickly. "I'm not saying this to defend her. I'm saying it because I think you deserve the truth. She's been spinning lies to everyone, including herself." I didn't respond, my thoughts too tangled to form words. "I'm done with her," Travis added. "I ended things as soon as I found out the full story. I wanted to clear my conscience." "Congratulations," I said coldly. "You're still a piece of trash." He sighed but didn't argue. "Yeah, I probably deserve that. Anyway, I'll leave you alone now. I just thought you should know." The line went dead before I could respond. I sat there for a long time, staring at the phone in my hand. Amber's lies went deeper than I'd thought. She wasn't just cheating. She was rewriting history to make herself the victim. The sheer audacity of it made my blood boil. I stood up, pacing the room as anger surged through me. I couldn't believe I'd ever trusted her, ever loved her. But that love was gone now, replaced by a resolve I hadn't felt in years. Amber wanted to play games, but I was done playing. It was time to finalize the divorce and move on with my life, for good. Later that evening, as I was organizing some files for Linda, a knock at the door startled me. I wasn't expecting anyone. With a sigh, I set down the papers and walked to the door. When I opened it, there she was, Amber. She looked disheveled, her usually perfect hair a mess, and her eyes rimmed red as though she'd been crying for hours. She clutched a small bag in one hand and wrung the strap nervously. "What do you want, Amber?" I asked flatly, not bothering to hide my irritation. I need to talk to you," she said, her voice shaky. "Please, Nate. I need 5 minutes." I crossed my arms, leaning against the doorframe. "Why should I give you 5 minutes? You've had months to come clean, and all you've done is lie." Her face crumpled, but I didn't care. "I'm not here to lie anymore," she said quietly. "I just want to explain myself." "Explain?" I barked a bitter laugh. "I already know the truth, Amber. You cheated. You lied. You even told your little boyfriend that I cheated to justify what you did. So what could you possibly explain?" She flinched at my words but held her ground. "You're right," she said softly. "I lied about you. I lied to Travis, to myself, to everyone. But I wasn't trying to hurt you, Nate. I was trying to convince myself that I wasn't the monster I've become." Her words caught me off guard. For the first time, she wasn't making excuses or shifting blame. She looked broken, and a small, vindictive part of me felt satisfaction in seeing her this way. "What do you want from me, Amber?" I asked, my tone softer but still guarded. "I want to make amends," she said, her voice trembling. "I know I can't undo what I've done, but I don't want this to end with us hating each other." I stared at her, struggling to find the right words. "You don't get to decide how this ends, Amber. You lost that right when you betrayed me." Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she nodded. "I know, but I'm still asking. Not for forgiveness, but for a chance to fix what I can." I took a deep breath, my anger slowly giving way to exhaustion. "If you're serious about making amends, then prove it. Sign the divorce papers without a fight. Don't try to take what isn't yours." She looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and regret. I'll sign them," she said finally. "But can we at least talk before we finalize everything? Just once." I hesitated, unsure if I wanted to hear more from her. But there was something in her voice, a vulnerability that seemed genuine. "Fine," I said reluctantly. "One conversation, but don't expect it to change anything." Amber nodded, relief flashing across her face. "Thank you," she whispered. I stepped back, closing the door before she could say anything else. As I returned to the living room, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over yet. Amber was still hiding something. I could feel it. The next morning, I woke up feeling restless. Amber's unexpected visit had stirred up emotions I thought I'd buried. Her promise to sign the divorce papers and her plea for one final conversation played on a loop in my mind. Something about her demeanor, her brokenness, felt off. I pushed the thoughts aside and headed to the office. Linda had called me in to go over some last-minute details before serving the divorce papers to Amber. As I sat across from her desk, she slid a folder toward me. "This is everything we'll need to move forward," she said, her voice steady. "Given the evidence, this case should be straightforward. But I want you to be prepared. Amber might fight back." I nodded, my jaw tightening. "She said she'd sign without a fight." Linda raised an eyebrow. "People say a lot of things. Actions speak louder." Her words stayed with me as I left the office. I wasn't naive enough to believe Amber's guilt would guarantee her cooperation. If she was hiding something, and I was almost certain she was, it might complicate things. That evening, my suspicions were confirmed. Amber called me, her voice frantic. "Nate, I need to talk to you. Now." I sighed, already regretting my earlier agreement. "What is it, Amber?" "It's about Travis," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "He's threatening me." That got my attention. "Threatening you? Why?" She hesitated, and I could hear the shakiness in her breath. He found out about the divorce. He thinks I used him, and now he's saying he'll expose me if I don't give him money. I let out a bitter laugh. So, your affair partner is blackmailing you. Fitting. This isn't a joke, Nate, she snapped, her voice breaking. He has photos, messages, everything. If he goes public, it'll ruin me. Ruin you, I said, incredulous. Amber, you already ruined yourself. What difference does it make now? There was silence on the other end, and when she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. I thought you should know, in case he tries to drag you into it. The audacity of her statement nearly made me hang up, but a nagging thought stopped me. If Travis really had evidence, it could complicate the divorce, especially if Amber tried to twist the narrative in her favor. I'll deal with it, I said finally, my tone icy. But don't think for a second that I'm doing this for you. Amber didn't argue. She simply whispered, "Thank you," and hung up. The next day, I tracked down Travis. It wasn't hard. Amber's phone had his number saved, and a quick search gave me his address. When I showed up at his door, he looked surprised but not entirely shocked. "Nate," he said, leaning against the doorframe with a smug grin. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Cut the crap," I said, stepping closer. "I know you're threatening Amber. Whatever you're planning, stop it." He chuckled, shaking his head.
Relax, man.
It's not like I'm trying to ruin her life. Just teaching her a lesson. I narrowed my eyes. "You're playing with fire, Travis. I don't care what you do to her, but if you drag me into this, you'll regret it." His grin faltered, and I saw a flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. All right. Message received. I'll back off." "Good," I said, turning to leave. But before I walked away, I glanced back at him. "And Travis? Stay out of my life." As I drove home, a strange sense of satisfaction washed over me. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I was regaining control. Not just over the situation, but over my life. The following evening, Amber showed up unannounced again. This time, she looked calmer, though her face still bore the weight of sleepless nights. She stood on the porch, clutching a manila envelope, her expression a mix of resignation and determination. "Can I come in?" she asked. I hesitated but stepped aside, motioning for her to enter. She sat on the couch while I remained standing, arms crossed. "What now, Amber?" She placed the envelope on the coffee table and pushed it toward me. "It's everything. The messages, the photos, the receipts. All of it." I raised an eyebrow. "Why are you giving me this?" "Because I need you to know I'm done hiding," she said quietly. "I know it doesn't change what I've done, but I don't want there to be any more secrets between us." I stared at the envelope, the weight of her words settling in. "Is this your way of trying to absolve yourself?" I asked bitterly. Amber shook her head.
No.
"I know I can't undo the damage I've caused. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I just want to leave with some dignity." "Dignity?" I repeated, laughing coldly. "You think this gives you dignity?" She looked down, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. "Maybe not, but it's the only way I know how to face you now." I sat down, picking up the envelope and flipping through its contents. It was all there, proof of her infidelity, the late-night rendezvous, the lies she'd told Travis, and even a few journal entries she'd written, detailing her guilt and self-loathing. It was a lot to process, but one thing was clear. She was finally telling the truth. "I'll sign the divorce papers," Amber said, breaking the silence.
No fights, no demands.
"You can keep the house, the accounts, everything. I just want to move on." Her words surprised me. After everything she'd done, I expected her to cling to whatever she could salvage. But this felt genuine. "Why now?" I asked, narrowing my eyes. "Why give up so easily?" She let out a shaky breath. "Because I've already lost the most important thing, your trust. There's nothing left to fight for." I studied her face, searching for any sign of manipulation, but all I saw was a broken woman. For the first time in weeks, I felt the faintest flicker of pity for her. "Fine," I said finally. "Sign the papers and we'll be done." Amber nodded, standing up slowly. "Thank you," she said softly, "for letting me say my piece." I didn't respond, watching as she walked to the door. Just before she left, she turned to look at me one last time.
I'm sorry, Nate.
For everything. And then she was gone. As the door closed, I sat there in silence, the envelope still in my hands. Part of me wanted to burn it, to erase every trace of her betrayal. But another part knew I needed to hold on to it, not for revenge, but as a reminder of what I'd survived. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. It was the beginning of a new chapter. The days following Amber's final visit were surprisingly quiet. She signed the divorce papers without hesitation, true to her word. Linda handled the formalities with her usual efficiency, and within a few weeks, the marriage that had once felt unbreakable was officially over. I expected to feel a wave of sadness or regret when it became final, but instead, I felt free. For the first time in years, I wasn't weighed down by suspicion, disappointment, or Amber's emotional games. The house, once filled with tension, now felt like a sanctuary. One evening, I stood in the kitchen, a beer in hand, staring out at the backyard. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the fence Amber and I had painted together years ago. It struck me how much of my life I'd spent tying my happiness to someone else's actions. That ended now. I started making changes. I swapped out the furniture that Amber had insisted on buying and redecorated the house to reflect my own tastes. I donated her things to charity, finding a surprising sense of closure in boxing up the remnants of our life together. Work became my focus. Throwing myself into my career wasn't just a distraction. It was a way to rebuild my identity. The dealership was thriving, and I found renewed energy in growing the business. For the first time in years, I wasn't working to escape my personal life. I was working to create a future I could be proud of. Jake, my best friend, became my sounding board during this time. "Man, I can't believe how well you're handling all this," he said one night over beers. "I'd have lost my mind if it were me." "I won't lie," I said, leaning back in my chair. "There were moments I wanted to burn it all down. But at some point, you realize the best revenge isn't anger. It's moving on." Jake nodded, raising his bottle. "To moving on, then." "To moving on," I echoed, clinking bottles with him. A month later, I received an unexpected call from Amber. Her name flashed on my phone, and for a moment, I considered ignoring it. But curiosity got the better of me. "What do you want, Amber?" I asked when I answered. I wanted to check in," she said, her voice hesitant. "See how you're doing." I laughed, the sound bitter. "You lost the right to care about me a long time ago." "I know," she said quickly. "I'm not trying to intrude. I wanted to tell you I'm leaving town. I've got a job offer in another state, and I think it's time for a fresh start." I didn't know how to respond at first. Part of me was relieved to hear she was leaving, but another part couldn't ignore the faint trace of sadness in her voice. "Good luck," I said finally. "I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." "Thank you," she said softly, "for everything. And I mean that." The call ended, and with it, the last lingering thread of our connection. As I set the phone down, I realized something profound. I didn't hate Amber anymore. The anger, the resentment, it had all faded, replaced by a quiet acceptance. She was a chapter in my life, and like all chapters, it had an end. But my story was far from over. Amber's departure marked the beginning of a new era for me. With her gone and the divorce finalized, I was free to focus on myself for the first time in years. It was both liberating and daunting. I started by tackling the small things, the neglected hobbies, the abandoned projects. The backyard that Amber and I had always talked about renovating but never did, I turned it into a haven. A new deck, string lights, and a small fire pit transformed the space into a retreat I could be proud of. It felt good to create something entirely my own. I also started reconnecting with people I'd unintentionally drifted from during my marriage. Jake and I went on fishing trips we'd talked about for years but never made time for. I joined a local running club, rediscovering my love for the activity. It wasn't just about filling the void Amber left. It was about finding myself again. One Saturday morning, while running with the club, I met someone new. Her name was Rachel, a nurse who'd moved to town recently. She was kind, easy to talk to, and refreshingly down to earth. We started chatting during our runs, and before I knew it, we were meeting for coffee afterward. Rachel wasn't like Amber. There was no pretense, no games. She was genuine, and that was something I hadn't realized I'd been missing. One evening, over dinner, Rachel asked me about my past. I hesitated at first, unsure how much to share, but something about her openness made me want to be honest. I went through a pretty rough divorce recently, I admitted. My ex cheated, and it broke me for a while. Rachel nodded, her expression empathetic. I'm sorry you went through that. No one deserves to be treated that way. Thanks, I said, managing a small smile. I'm still figuring things out, but I think I'm finally starting to feel like myself again. That's all you can do, she said gently. Take it one day at a time. As the weeks turned into months, Rachel and I grew closer. I didn't rush into anything. We both agreed to take things slow. But for the first time in what felt like forever, I saw the possibility of a future that wasn't clouded by betrayal or pain. It wasn't just Rachel who helped me heal. It was the life I was building. I realized that Amber's actions, as devastating as they were, had forced me to confront things about myself I'd been ignoring. I'd been so focused on being a provider, on maintaining the image of a perfect marriage, that I'd lost sight of my own happiness. Now, I was reclaiming that happiness one small step at a time. One evening, as I sat on the new deck I'd built, the fire pit crackling softly beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Peace. The weight of the past had finally lifted, and in its place was a quiet determination to move forward. Amber was a part of my story, but she wasn't the ending. This was my life, and for the first time in a long time, I was excited to see where it would take me. A year after Amber walked out of my life, I stood in the middle of my rebuilt world and realized I was happier than I'd been in years. The scars of her betrayal remained, but they no longer defined me. They were reminders of what I'd endured, of the lessons I'd learned, and of the strength I never knew I had. Rachel became a constant presence in my life. She never pushed, never demanded more than I was ready to give. Her patience and kindness helped me trust again, something I thought I'd never be able to do. Our relationship wasn't perfect, nothing ever is, but it was honest. And that made all the difference. One night, as we sat on the deck under the stars, Rachel turned to me. "You've come a long way, you know," she said, her voice soft. I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "Yeah, I guess I have. What's next for you?" she asked, her eyes twinkling with curiosity. The question gave me pause. For so long, my focus had been on surviving the aftermath of my marriage. Now I was finally in a position to dream again. "I think it's time to expand the business," I said after a moment. "I've been thinking about opening another dealership in the next town over." Rachel grinned. "That's exciting. You've got the drive for it." "It feels good to think about the future again," I admitted, glancing at her. For a while, I wasn't sure I even had one. "You've always had a future, Nate," she said, placing her hand over mine. "You just had to find it." As time passed, I saw Amber less and less. She moved to another state and started over, just as she'd planned. Occasionally, I'd hear about her through mutual acquaintances. She was working a steady job, and by all accounts she seemed to be trying to turn her life around. I didn't wish her ill, I just didn't wish her anything at all. She was a closed chapter, one I had no desire to revisit. The new dealership opened 6 months later, and it thrived just like the first. My life was fuller than I ever thought possible. Friends, work, love. And while it wasn't the life I had once imagined, it was better because it was mine. On the 1-year anniversary of my divorce, I sat on the deck with Rachel, a glass of wine in hand. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the fire pit cast a warm glow around us. I looked at her, then out at the life I'd rebuilt, and felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Betrayal had once defined my darkest days, but it also became the catalyst for my brightest ones.